I knew I would be everything. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, in the sun-scorched town of Ajaccio on the island of Corsica. This was no ordinary birth. The island itself was at the heart of conflict. Just months before, Corsica had been wrested from the Republic of Genoa and handed over to France. The guns had barely fallen silent from the recent struggles of Corsican patriots who fiercely resisted foreign rule. Napoleon's family was part of the minor nobility of Corsica, but they were poor and caught between two worlds. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer who had initially supported the Corsican independence movement under the charismatic Pasquale Paoli. However, when the French took control, Carlo pragmatically pledged allegiance to the French government, a move that earned both opportunities and scorn. Napoleon's mother, Letizia Ramolino, was a woman of formidable strength and faith. She bore 13 children, of whom 8 survived infancy, and she raised them with a harsh discipline that would shape Napoleon's steely character. From an early age, Napoleon showed signs of brilliance and determination. He was quiet, introspective, and often prone to fits of anger. The young boy was fiercely proud of his Corsican heritage and resented the French who had imposed their rule. Yet, he also held a restless ambition that set him apart from his peers. Napoleon's early life in Corsica was defined by contradiction and conflict. At home, he was raised with pride in his island's history, its rugged independence, and its defiant culture. Corsicans considered themselves a people apart from the French, with their own language, customs, and fierce sense of honor. Yet, as a result of his father's decision to cooperate with the French regime, Napoleon was granted a scholarship to study in France, an opportunity that came with a price. At the tender age of 9, Napoleon left Corsica for the first time. He traveled with his older brother Joseph to the French mainland to attend the Royal Military School of Brienne-le-Château, a boarding school in northeastern France. The voyage across the sea was more than just physical, it was emotional exile. He was leaving behind not only his family and homeland, but his identity. At Brienne, the young Corsican was a misfit. He spoke French poorly and with a thick accent that made him the butt of cruel jokes. He came from a distant, poor province with a reputation for rebellion. His clothes were coarse, his manners provincial, his confidence shaky. The aristocratic sons of France, some of them future generals and nobles, saw him as little more than a wild peasant. They called him La Payalonnaise, straw nose, and laughed at his name. Napoleon, however, was not one to crumble. The scorn he received did not break him. It hardened him. He withdrew into solitude and found his revenge not in fistfights or complaints, but in study. He devoured books on history, geography, and mathematics. He memorized military campaigns and drew maps of battles in the dirt behind the school barracks. He became obsessed with the stories of men who rose from obscurity to greatness: Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Hannibal, and Scipio. Though he was quiet and often alone, the teachers noticed his brilliance. His aptitude for mathematics was especially strong, a skill that would serve him well in his later artillery training. He also began writing at a young age. His first surviving manuscript was a romantic novella titled Clisson et Eugenie, and he also penned fiery essays on Corsican nationalism, including one in which he declared, "Corsica will never be truly free until she is ruled by one of her own sons." Still, his years at Brienne were bitter. In a letter written in his teenage years, Napoleon confessed, "I am not like the others. I do not laugh, I do not play, I do not dance. I learn, I remember, I suffer, and I wait." Waiting, as it turned out, would serve him well. At 15, after 5 years at Brienne, Napoleon passed his examinations and earned entry to the prestigious École Militaire in Paris. This was the highest military academy in France, the finishing school for officers who would go on to serve in the Royal Army. But even here, Napoleon's path was not easy. Napoleon arrived in Paris in 1784, just 15 years old, ready to begin his studies at the École Militaire. It was a prestigious institution filled with the sons of noble families and seasoned military instructors. Though he had passed the entrance exam with high marks, he still carried the mark of an outsider, Corsican, poor, and intense. From the beginning, his experience in Paris was marked by hardship. Shortly after arriving, tragedy struck. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, died of stomach cancer in Montpellier. He had been just 40 years old. The death shattered the fragile financial foundation of the Bonaparte family. Napoleon suddenly became the eldest male head of the household. His mother, Letizia, now a widow with 7 children to support, relied increasingly on Napoleon to provide. Money was tight. Napoleon often went hungry. He wore his uniform until it was threadbare. He avoided social gatherings and dances because he could not afford the required shoes or gloves. While his classmates enjoyed theater and fine dinners, Napoleon studied late into the night by candlelight, poring over books on history, science, and military theory. He completed the 2-year course in just 1 year, an exceptional feat, and at age 16, he graduated as a second lieutenant in the artillery, one of the most demanding branches of the French military. His first posting was in Valence, a provincial town along the Rhone River. There, Napoleon lived in a small rented room above a baker's shop. He earned a modest officer's salary but sent most of it home to support his mother and siblings in Corsica. Though he socialized little, he began to write more actively. Essays on politics, strategy, and even short fiction. He also read voraciously Rousseau, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Machiavelli. From Rousseau, he drew ideas about the will of the people. From Machiavelli, the cold logic of power. Napoleon's days were filled with drills, cannon maintenance, and field exercises. But his nights were consumed with ideas. He began sketching outlines for books on military strategy. He made notes on the strengths and weaknesses of every major European army. He observed not only tactics but psychology. He believed war was as much about morale as firepower. A general, he thought, must be a psychologist, a mathematician, and a prophet. Despite his quiet demeanor, his superiors recognized his intellect and discipline. He was described as serious beyond his years, diligent, and utterly focused. He was not loved, but he was respected. Still, Napoleon was not satisfied with life as a provincial officer. He felt that destiny awaited him somewhere beyond the parade ground. And so, in 1789, as the French Revolution erupted and swept across the country, he saw his opportunity. The ancien regime, the old monarchy, was crumbling. Aristocrats were fleeing. The royal army was disintegrating. Revolutionary fervor was everywhere. In Corsica, Paoli had returned from exile, welcomed back as a hero. The French government gave him de facto control of the island. To Napoleon, this seemed like the perfect moment to return home and serve the cause of Corsican freedom. He took leave and returned to Ajaccio in 1791, brimming with revolutionary ideas and military experience. He envisioned Corsica not as a province, but as an equal partner in a future democratic France. At first, he tried to work with Paoli, but the old general viewed the young officer with suspicion. Napoleon was too French now, too eager, too ambitious. Tensions grew. Paoli's supporters clashed with French Republicans on the island. Napoleon took sides with the revolutionaries. In 1793, the conflict exploded into violence. Napoleon and his family were attacked by Corsican nationalists. Their house was looted. Forced to flee for their lives, the Bonapartes boarded a French ship bound for Toulon. They had lost everything. Corsica had turned its back on them. In exile, Napoleon made a fateful decision. He would no longer be Corsican. He would be French. Fully, fiercely, absolutely. Napoleon's exile from Corsica was not the end. It was the beginning. When the Bonaparte family arrived in Toulon in 1793, they had little more than their names and military connections. France itself was in chaos. The revolution had turned from hopeful to bloody. The king had been executed. The reign of terror was underway. Every day the guillotine claimed more heads. But amid the terror, Napoleon saw a vacuum of power and opportunity. Toulon, a strategic Mediterranean port city, had fallen into the hands of royalists backed by the British Navy. The French revolutionary government, the Republic, sent troops to retake it, but progress was slow. A young artillery officer, recently promoted to captain, offered a bold plan. That officer was Napoleon Bonaparte. That he studied the terrain and identified a weak point, a promontory called L'Aiguillette. If French artillery could be placed there, they could bombard the harbor and force the British fleet to withdraw. It was a plan rooted in math, maps, and precision, and it worked. The siege was bloody and Napoleon was wounded in the thigh by a bayonet, but his plan succeeded. The British withdrew. The port was recaptured. France had won a critical victory. And Napoleon? He was just 24 years old. For his brilliance, he was promoted to brigadier general, a leap that shocked many. He had skipped over more senior officers and gained the attention of powerful figures in Paris, including Maximilien Robespierre's younger brother, Augustin. For the first time, Napoleon's name began to circulate in political salons and military councils. Some whispered that he was lucky. Others insisted he was ruthless. But none denied that he was effective. Then came 1795. The revolution had devoured itself. Robespierre had fallen. A new government called the Directory took power, weak, uncertain, unpopular. In October, royalist mobs rose in rebellion in Paris, hoping to restore the monarchy. The Directory panicked. The army was disorganized. Officers were deserting. One man stepped forward, General Bonaparte, that he had recently been reassigned and was languishing without command. But Paul Barras, one of the Directory's leading members, remembered the name from Toulon. He called for Napoleon. In one of the most consequential decisions of his life, Napoleon acted swiftly. He ordered his troops to bring cannons into the heart of Paris. As the royalist mob approached the Tuileries, he gave the order, "Fire," with devastating efficiency. His artillery unleashed grapeshot into the crowd. Hundreds were killed or wounded in minutes. The uprising collapsed. The capital was secured. Later, this moment was famously referred to as a whiff of grapeshot. To Napoleon, it was the day he proved that force, not speeches, would rule post-revolutionary France. The Directory rewarded him with a new command and greater trust. In a city scarred by fear, people spoke his name with a mix of awe and apprehension, and no longer was he the little Corsican mocked for his accent and short stature. He was General Bonaparte, a man who could command, who could act, and who could win. Paris in the mid-1790s was a city suspended between memory and fear, haunted by the ghosts of kings and the recent horrors of the Reign of Terror. Into this fragile political vacuum stepped Napoleon Bonaparte, a young general with a new reputation and an old grudge against obscurity. Following his brutal suppression of the Royalist uprising in October 1795, Napoleon became the darling of the Directory. He was promoted again and awarded command of the Army of the Interior, effectively putting him in charge of Paris's security. His swift and decisive action had saved the regime, and in return, the regime gave him power, real power. But for Napoleon, this was not enough. Now a fixture in Parisian political circles, he began to frequent salons where revolutionary thinkers mingled with military officers and ambitious socialites. It was in one of these circles that he met Josephine de Beauharnais, a graceful and charming widow 6 years his senior. She was the former wife of a guillotined nobleman and a woman of considerable influence. Napoleon was smitten. Josephine was worldly, connected, and strategically placed in the upper tiers of society. Their marriage in March 1796 was both romantic and political. It gave Napoleon legitimacy in elite circles, and she saw in him a man who was going places, fast. Just 2 days after the wedding, Napoleon left Paris to take command of the Army of Italy. This army was a ragtag collection of underfed, poorly equipped soldiers languishing in the Alps. The generals before him had achieved little. Morale was low. Supplies were scarce. The Directory sent Napoleon south as much to get rid of him as to win a war. But once again, they had underestimated him. Napoleon immediately transformed the army. He addressed the troops personally, promising them victory, glory, and loot. He reorganized logistics, wrote his own propaganda, and drew up daring plans. In the spring of 1796, he launched a brilliant campaign through northern Italy that stunned the continent in a matter of weeks. He won multiple battles: Montenotte, Millesimo, Lodi. At Lodi, he led his men in a charge across a narrow bridge under Austrian fire, solidifying his legend as a leader who shared danger with his troops. Within a year, he had defeated the Austrians, forced the Treaty of Campo Formio, and redrawn the map of Europe. He had taken territory, captured cities, and humiliated the Habsburgs. But most importantly, he had become a hero of the French people. While the Directory remained weak and unpopular, Napoleon returned from Italy with the aura of Caesar. Newspapers across France called him the liberator of Italy, the savior of the Republic. Pamphlets praised his genius. Artists painted him like a Roman general. Children sang songs in his name. And back in Paris, politicians began to fear him. They were right to, because the boy from Corsica who had once walked alone through the snow at Brienne, mocked, poor, silent, now had armies at his command, a nation behind him, and the fire of history in his eyes. The Corsican boy had become a force of nature, and the world was about to change forever. They laughed at my accent, my clothes, my silence. But I was learning to conquer more than battles. I was learning to conquer myself. Napoleon Bonaparte, reflecting on his school days in 1780, at the tender age of 10, Napoleon Bonaparte arrived at the Royal Military School of Brienne-le-Château, a remote academy in northeastern France. This was the first true test of his young life. A harsh immersion into a world that was alien and often hostile. Corsica was still fresh in his mind. A rugged island with fierce pride and a stubborn refusal to bow. But Brienne was another world entirely. Here, Napoleon was a foreigner, an outsider. He spoke French poorly, his accent thick and unmistakable. His clothes were plain, his manners rough. The aristocratic boys around him sneered at the little Corsican, who spoke in strange phrases and walked with a stubborn glare. Napoleon quickly learned that acceptance here was not given freely, it was earned. But he did not try to make friends. He kept to himself, retreating into books and study. Mathematics, history, geography, these became his refuge. Above all, military history fascinated him. He memorized the campaigns of Hannibal, Caesar, and Alexander the Great. Each story was a lesson, a blueprint for glory. He was not the strongest or the fastest, but his mind was sharp, relentless. He would walk alone for hours in the cold courtyard, plotting imaginary battles, sketching fortresses in the dirt. Teachers noticed his intensity and discipline, but also his distance. Napoleon's notebooks from this period reveal a young man consumed by ambition and isolation. In one, he wrote, "I am alone, but not lonely. The world is mine to conquer." Life at Brienne was not just intellectual challenge. It was also a social trial. The other cadets mocked him mercilessly. His accent, his provincial manners, even his height. Straw-nosed, they called him. Yet these slights only hardened his resolve. Every insult was a spark that fueled his inner fire. His closest friendships were with his books and his dreams. At night, by candlelight, he wrote essays and a novella titled Clisson et Eugenie. The story told of young love and honor, themes that reflected his own inner world, still shaped by Corsican ideals. At 15, after 5 years of relentless study, Napoleon passed his exams and was admitted to the prestigious École Militaire in Paris. But this new stage would prove even more challenging, a crucible where his character and destiny would be further forged. Arriving in Paris at the École Militaire in 1784, 16-year-old Napoleon found himself in the epicenter of France's intellectual and political turmoil. The academy was prestigious, but also highly competitive. Here, the sons of France's elite mingled with the best military minds, and the stakes were higher than ever. Yet, Napoleon remained an outsider. His Corsican accent marked him as different. His modest background meant he lacked the polished manners and social graces of his peers. He was smaller, leaner, less refined. Many cadets saw him as provincial, a foreigner unworthy of their respect. Despite this, Napoleon's exceptional talent could not be ignored. He excelled in artillery, a branch of the army that prized mathematical precision and engineering skill. His instructors praised his ability to calculate trajectories and to quickly grasp complex strategic concepts. Napoleon's time at École Militaire was marked by intense study and personal sacrifice. His father's death in 1785 had left the family in financial difficulty, forcing Napoleon to mature rapidly. He lived frugally, avoided frivolous distractions, and focused entirely on his military education. During this period, Napoleon's worldview began to take shape. He read widely Enlightenment philosophers like Rousseau and Voltaire, historians like Gibbon and Plutarch. He absorbed ideas about liberty, power, and leadership. But he was no mere idealist. He understood the brutal realities of politics and war. His letters from this time reveal a young man torn between loyalty to Corsica and acceptance of his French identity. He dreamed of Corsica's independence, yet he also saw France as the stage on which he would carve his destiny. In 1785, after only 1 year, Napoleon graduated early from École Militaire, a rare honor. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the artillery at the age of 16. His first postings were to provincial garrisons, far from the glamour of Paris. In these small towns, he honed his skills and built his reputation quietly. He studied fortifications, practiced drills, and prepared himself for the chaos that was soon to engulf France. Yet even in obscurity, his ambition burned brightly. He wrote essays advocating meritocracy, criticized the corruption of the Ancien regime, and envisioned a new France led by talent rather than birthright. Napoleon was no longer just a boy from Corsica. He was becoming a man with a mission. The years following his commissioning were a crucible for young Napoleon. Though he held the rank of second lieutenant, his assignments were modest. Small garrisons in remote towns such as Auxonne and Valence. These postings were far from the battlefields of Europe, but they offered Napoleon a chance to refine his military expertise away from the political chaos of Paris. Napoleon's passion for artillery deepened. He meticulously studied cannon deployment, ballistics, and the logistics of moving heavy weaponry through difficult terrain. He began drafting theoretical papers on artillery strategy and wrote critical analyses of recent European conflicts. His fellow officers sometimes dismissed him as aloof and eccentric. He rarely socialized or indulged in the pleasures common among soldiers. Instead, he preferred long solitary walks, carrying books under his arm, absorbed in thought. His discipline was legendary, his attention to detail uncompromising. Despite the relative quiet of these years, Napoleon was quietly making connections. Through correspondence and visits to Paris, he stayed in touch with influential figures sympathetic to revolutionary ideas. His family ties, particularly with his brother Joseph and mother Letizia, kept him grounded and motivated. In letters home, Napoleon expressed a growing impatience. The revolutionary spirit sweeping France ignited in him a vision of grandeur and change. He believed the old order was doomed, and that a new era of merit and power was dawning, an era in which he intended to lead. However, his loyalty to Corsica complicated matters. When his homeland erupted in conflict between Paoli loyalists and French Republicans, Napoleon was torn. Initially, he sought to reconcile his Corsican roots with his French allegiance, hoping to support Corsica's autonomy within the new republic. This delicate balance shattered in 1793. Corsica became a battleground. Paoli, once a hero to Napoleon, turned against the French revolutionaries. The Bonaparte family, loyal to France, was declared traitors. Their house was attacked, forcing them to flee the island under threat of death. This exile was a painful rupture. Corsica, the land of his birth and first identity, had rejected him. But for Napoleon, it also meant liberation. Free from the chains of local politics and vendettas, he was now fully French and ready to embrace his destiny. Exiled from Corsica, Napoleon and his family arrived in mainland France with little more than determination and ambition. The political landscape was shifting violently around them. The French Revolution was in full swing, and the old aristocracy was crumbling. Napoleon quickly realized that his future lay not in provincial postings but on the national stage. He threw himself into the revolution's cause, joining the Jacobins and aligning with the radical factions who promised a merit-based society. His military talents began to attract notice. His participation in defending the revolutionary government against royalist uprisings proved crucial. Most famously, in October 1795, when royalist forces attempted to seize Paris, Napoleon was called upon to command the artillery defending the convention with cool precision. He ordered grapeshot fired into the advancing royalists, crushing the uprising in what became known as the whiff of grapeshot. This ruthless but decisive action won him promotion to brigadier general and solidified his reputation as a defender of the revolution. Despite his rapid rise, Napoleon remained fiercely private. His ambitions were vast, but he concealed them beneath a veneer of discipline and modesty. His marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais in 1796 marked a personal turning point. Although their relationship was complex and often stormy, Josephine's connections provided Napoleon with valuable social leverage. Shortly after their wedding, Napoleon received command of the Army of Italy. This was considered a backwater assignment by many in Paris, a dangerous frontier where supplies were scarce and victories hard-won. But for Napoleon, it was the stage upon which he would prove his genius. His Italian campaign was swift, brilliant, and relentless. Using speed, surprise, and masterful artillery deployment, he defeated larger Austrian forces and reshaped European politics. His victories brought him fame, fortune, and the adulation of the French people. The boy from Corsica had not only conquered his enemies but had also conquered himself. Rising from an outcast cadet to a legendary general and future emperor, Napoleon's years as a foreign cadet, outsider, and young officer forged the foundation for his future greatness. His experiences of rejection and perseverance shaped not only his military skills but also his psyche. He learned early that power was not given, it was seized. His Corsican roots, once a source of pride and conflict, became the secret fire that propelled him forward. The insults, loneliness, and hardship at Brienne and École Militaire steeled his resolve. More than just a soldier, Napoleon became a strategist of history itself. He combined cold calculation with passionate ambition, intellect with intuition, and discipline with charisma. This chapter of his life ended with him standing on the brink of greatness. A general who had saved the revolution, married into influential circles, and conquered northern Italy. But the true test of his destiny was still to come. In March 1796, at just 26 years old, Napoleon Bonaparte was handed command of the French Army of Italy. It was a modest force, ill-equipped, underpaid, and demoralized, but it offered him an unprecedented opportunity to make his mark on history. The Italian peninsula was fragmented, a patchwork of republics, duchies, kingdoms, and foreign-held territories. The Austrian Habsburgs and their allies controlled much of northern Italy, using it as a strategic foothold against France. The French government expected little from this theater, a holding action at best. Napoleon, however, saw potential where others saw only chaos. Upon assuming command, he immediately assessed the situation. The troops were starving, the officers divided, and the supply lines unreliable. The morale was near rock bottom. But Napoleon was undeterred. His mind worked quickly, devising plans that blended boldness with careful calculation. One of his first acts was to instill discipline and boost morale. He addressed his soldiers directly, promising glory, riches, and honor. His charisma and vision rekindled hope in a weary army. Strategically, Napoleon planned to exploit the fragmented nature of his enemies. The Austrians, Piedmontese, and Sardinians were divided, their armies scattered across difficult terrain. Rather than face them en masse, he intended to strike swiftly, defeating each in detail. His campaign began in April 1796. Using rapid marches, feints, and surprise attacks, Napoleon caught the Austrians off guard. At the Battle of Montagnat, he decisively defeated the Austrians, forcing them to retreat. This victory was the first of many. Soon followed the battles of Malesimo and Dago, where Napoleon's use of artillery and infantry coordination overwhelmed the enemy. His soldiers admired his presence on the front lines, where he inspired them with fearless leadership. By May, the Sardinian forces had been driven back, and the Treaty of Paris forced Sardinia to exit the war. Austria was isolated, vulnerable. Napoleon's campaign was not just military. It was psychological warfare. He used propaganda, forged alliances with local revolutionaries, and reorganized occupied territories to establish republican governments loyal to France. His victories sent shockwaves across Europe. Paris celebrated the young general as a hero. Newspapers dubbed him the liberator of Italy, and artists immortalized his image in paintings and sculptures. Yet, despite his triumphs, Napoleon was not complacent. He knew the political currents in Paris were fickle, and the revolutionary government's support was unstable. To secure his position, he needed not only battlefield success but also political savvy. As spring turned to summer in 1796, Napoleon's campaign intensified. His army, though still modest in number, was agile and fiercely loyal. His rapid maneuvers bewildered his enemies. Austrian commanders, bound by traditional tactics and slower decision-making, struggled to keep pace. One of Napoleon's key innovations was his mastery of logistics. He ensured his troops were supplied not only through official channels but also by requisitioning resources from conquered territories. This living-off-the-land approach was controversial but effective, allowing his army to advance rapidly without being bogged down by supply trains. The Battle of Lodi, fought on May 10, 1796, became one of his signature victories. Facing a heavily defended bridge over the Adda River, Napoleon personally led the charge, rallying his men under heavy fire. The dramatic assault broke Austrian resistance, opening the path to Milan. Napoleon's triumph in Milan was not just military. It was political theater. He entered the city amid celebrations, proclaiming the end of tyranny and the dawn of liberty. He established a provisional government loyal to France and instituted reforms that earned him local support. His campaign continued with a string of victories: Castiglione, Arcole, and Rivoli. Each battle demonstrated his ability to combine speed, surprise, and precise artillery bombardments. His enemies were consistently outmaneuvered and demoralized. Napoleon's successes in Italy reshaped European geopolitics. The Habsburgs were forced to divert resources from other fronts, weakening their position overall. His establishment of sister republics in northern Italy extended French revolutionary ideals and created buffer zones against monarchist coalitions. However, the campaign also had darker aspects. The requisitioning of supplies often led to hardship among local populations. His soldiers, hungry and restless, sometimes engaged in looting and violence. Napoleon tolerated this as a necessary cost of war but sought to maintain discipline. In Paris, the Directory watched with a mixture of admiration and wariness. Napoleon's growing power threatened established political figures. Some feared he might become too influential, too independent. Undeterred, Napoleon cultivated his image carefully. He corresponded regularly with political patrons and maintained a public persona of a devoted servant to the Republic. Yet behind the scenes, he was already planning for a future beyond mere military command. By late 1796, his victories had transformed him from a promising officer into a national hero. He was the embodiment of revolutionary France's potential. Bold, ambitious, and unyielding, winter of 1796 to 1797 brought new challenges. As the fighting season slowed, Napoleon turned his attention to consolidating his gains and planning his next moves. He knew the war was as much political as it was military. He negotiated with local rulers and nobles, offering leniency in exchange for cooperation. His creation of sister republics, like the Cisalpine Republic, helped spread revolutionary ideals and provided strategic depth for France. These puppet states, while nominally independent, answered to Paris and Napoleon's will. Despite his growing power, Napoleon remained pragmatic. He avoided unnecessary cruelty and sought to balance order with the revolutionary zeal of his troops. His rule in occupied territories combined authoritarian control with reforms such as legal equality, abolition of feudal privileges, and secular education. But not all were pleased. Austrian commanders were frustrated and alarmed by Napoleon's successes and political maneuvers. In March 1797, after months of maneuvering, Napoleon launched his final push to end the campaign. The Battle of Rivoli was a turning point. Against overwhelming odds, Napoleon's forces decisively defeated an Austrian attempt to relieve the fortress of Mantua. The victory broke Austrian power in northern Italy and forced them to sue for peace. The subsequent Treaty of Campo Formio in October 1797 redrew Europe's map. Austria ceded Lombardy and other territories to France and its allies. The republics Napoleon had established were recognized. His fame reached new heights. Napoleon returned to Paris a triumphant figure, hailed by politicians, artists, and the public alike. Yet, beneath the acclaim, he was already plotting his next moves. He knew that military glory alone would not secure his legacy. Power in France required more than battlefield victories. It demanded political mastery. His campaign in Italy had transformed him from a provincial officer into a figure of European consequence. He had reshaped nations, toppled dynasties, and heralded a new age. But his journey was only beginning. Back in Paris, the political landscape was as volatile as ever. The Directory's grip on power was weakening amid corruption, economic troubles, and popular unrest. Meanwhile, Napoleon's star continued to rise, making him both a valuable asset and a potential threat. He cultivated key alliances within the government, carefully navigating the treacherous waters of revolutionary politics. His relationship with influential figures such as Paul Barras helped shield him from rivals and secure further military and political opportunities. During this period, Napoleon also began to craft his personal myth. He commissioned portraits depicting him as a classical hero, commanding, resolute, and almost divine. These images spread across France, reinforcing his reputation as the embodiment of revolutionary virtue and strength. Yet behind the grand image was a man deeply aware of the fragility of his position. He understood that the chaotic politics of Paris could swiftly turn against him. His ambitions extended beyond military command. He sought control over the French state itself. To that end, Napoleon cultivated a close circle of loyal officers and advisors. He valued competence and loyalty above all else, often promoting those who shared his vision and dismissing detractors without hesitation. His marriage to Josephine was complicated but politically useful. Despite personal strains, Josephine's social connections provided him access to elite circles and information networks crucial to his rise. In the years following the Italian campaign, Napoleon's blend of military genius, political acumen, and personal ambition set the stage for the dramatic events that would soon transform France and Europe. The Italian campaign not only established Napoleon as a military prodigy, but also revealed his capacity to wield power with an iron will and sharp intellect. His combination of strategic brilliance, political savvy, and charismatic leadership captivated the imagination of France and terrified its enemies. Though victorious on the battlefield, Napoleon was far from complacent. He viewed his success as a stepping stone to greater ambitions that transcended the war and aimed directly at the heart of French power. His reforms in Italy foreshadowed the modern state he envisioned, centralized, efficient, and ruled by merit rather than birthright. His emphasis on order and discipline balanced with revolutionary ideals shaped a new political order. Napoleon's Italian victories were celebrated widely. Pamphlets, songs, and paintings lionized his exploits. His image was everywhere, from the salons of Parisian elites to the streets filled with common citizens who saw in him a symbol of national pride and hope. But perhaps the most important outcome was the change within Napoleon himself. The young cadet who had once been mocked for his accent and origins was now a man commanding armies and shaping history. As he looked ahead, Napoleon understood that the real challenge lay not in conquering lands, but in conquering the fractured French state, a challenge that would demand all his cunning, ambition, and resolve. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte embarked on one of the most ambitious and controversial campaigns of his career, the Egyptian expedition. This venture aimed not only to strike a blow against Britain's imperial dominance but also to open new frontiers for France's expanding influence. Napoleon's decision to invade Egypt was bold. The Mediterranean had long been a contested zone, but Egypt was more than a strategic prize. It was a gateway to the riches of the East, including India, the jewel in Britain's colonial crown. The expedition was a complex blend of military ambition, political strategy, and scientific curiosity. Accompanying Napoleon were not only thousands of soldiers but also a retinue of scholars, engineers, and artists, the Commission de Sciences et d'Arts, tasked with studying Egypt's ancient civilization and geography. Napoleon envisioned the campaign as a civilizing mission as much as a military conquest. His famous declaration, "Soldiers, 40 centuries look down upon you," invoked the grandeur of Egypt's past and inspired his troops. The fleet carrying the French forces departed Toulon in May 1798. They successfully evaded the British Navy and landed near Alexandria in early July. The initial battles were swift and decisive, with the French capturing the city and then moving toward Cairo. However, the campaign quickly became more complicated. The unfamiliar desert terrain, harsh climate, and logistical challenges tested the French army's resilience. Moreover, the local population was not easily subdued. Uprisings and guerrilla warfare erupted, requiring constant vigilance. One of the campaign's most dramatic moments came at the Battle of the Pyramids, where Napoleon employed innovative tactics to defeat the Mamluk forces, using his infantry squares to withstand cavalry charges. Despite military successes, The French fleet suffered a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of the Nile when Admiral Nelson destroyed much of the French navy, isolating Napoleon's army. The campaign also ignited a surge of scientific discovery. The scholars accompanying the expedition documented ancient monuments, flora, and fauna, laying foundations for modern Egyptology. Napoleon's Egyptian adventure was a mixture of triumph, tragedy, and transformation. A critical chapter that expanded his vision from European general to global leader. Following the triumphant yet taxing landing in Alexandria, Napoleon swiftly moved to consolidate his position in Egypt. His vision extended beyond mere conquest. He sought to establish a lasting French presence that would reshape the region politically, culturally, and scientifically. The Battle of the Pyramids, fought on July 21, 1798, became a defining moment of the campaign. Facing the formidable Mamluk cavalry, known for their unmatched skill and ferocity, Napoleon employed a revolutionary tactic, forming massive infantry squares. These formations, disciplined and tightly knit, repelled the cavalry charges effectively, a tactic that stunned both his troops and his enemies. Napoleon's victory not only shattered the Mamluk forces but also allowed him to occupy Cairo, the heart of Egypt's administration and culture. Once there, he declared himself protector of the people, promising reforms and stability under French rule. However, the conquest was far from peaceful. Local resistance simmered, fueled by religious leaders and traditional elites who viewed the French as foreign invaders threatening their way of life. Guerrilla warfare erupted in the countryside, necessitating continuous military vigilance. Napoleon also focused on propaganda to win hearts and minds. He issued proclamations highlighting the benefits of French administration, including the abolition of feudal privileges and the introduction of new legal codes. Yet, these efforts often clashed with entrenched local customs and deep-seated mistrust. Meanwhile, the scientific expedition accompanying Napoleon flourished. The scholars meticulously documented Egypt's ancient monuments, language, flora, and fauna. Their work culminated in the monumental Description de l'Egypte, a foundational text in Egyptology. But the greatest blow to Napoleon's campaign came from the sea. The British Royal Navy, under Admiral Horatio Nelson, decisively defeated the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile in August 1798. This naval disaster stranded Napoleon's forces in Egypt, severing supply lines and complicating his strategic plans. Despite isolation, Napoleon remained undeterred. He continued to fight battles on land, including campaigns in Syria, but the strain was evident. The combination of military challenges, harsh environment, and political complexities tested his leadership like never before. The Egyptian expedition was both a testament to Napoleon's ambition and a cautionary tale of overreach, highlighting the limits of military conquest in unfamiliar and hostile terrain. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt was as much a battle of ideas as it was of armies. Surrounded by ancient ruins and a culture vastly different from his own, he sought to project himself not only as a conqueror but as a modernizer and scholar. He established the Institut d'Egypte, gathering the scientists and intellectuals of the expedition into a collective dedicated to advancing knowledge. This institution became a beacon of Enlightenment thought in the heart of a land steeped in millennia-old traditions. Napoleon's fascination with Egypt extended beyond military strategy. He engaged with the culture, visiting archaeological sites and commissioning detailed studies. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone by French soldiers during this campaign would later prove pivotal in deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. Yet, the difficulties were mounting. The British naval dominance after the Battle of the Nile meant supplies, reinforcements, and communication with France were severely limited. Morale among the troops fluctuated, and disease became rampant in the harsh desert environment. In 1799, Napoleon led a campaign into Syria to quell uprisings and extend French influence. Though initially successful in battles such as the Siege of Jaffa, the campaign stalled. The army suffered heavy losses from combat and plague, sapping strength and spirit. Throughout, Napoleon maintained his aura of invincibility, inspiring loyalty through his charisma and tactical brilliance. But the reality was stark. The Egyptian expedition had become a grueling ordeal, testing every facet of his leadership. Facing increasing difficulties and sensing political opportunity back in France, Napoleon made the controversial decision to secretly leave Egypt in August 1799, abandoning his army. he returned to Paris, setting the stage for his eventual seizure of power. The Egyptian expedition, while militarily mixed, broadened Napoleon's horizons and cemented his reputation as a man of destiny, one willing to take immense risks to reshape the world. Back in France, the political situation was precarious. The Directory government was weak and increasingly unpopular. Corruption, economic hardship, and political infighting plagued the nation. News of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign arrived with mixed reactions, admiration for his daring, but also concern over the stalled progress and the loss of the French fleet. Napoleon wasted no time. Leveraging his military reputation and the discontent with the government, he began plotting a path to power. His return from Egypt was shrouded in secrecy, arriving in France in October 1799 without fanfare but with decisive intent. Within weeks, Napoleon orchestrated the coup of 18 Brumaire, November 9, 1799, overthrowing the Directory and establishing the consulate. This marked the end of the French Revolution's chaotic phase and the beginning of Napoleon's rule. The Egyptian expedition, though fraught with hardships and strategic setbacks, had elevated Napoleon to a position where he could seize control of France. It expanded his vision beyond European battlefields, hinting at a global scope for his ambitions. Moreover, the scientific and cultural achievements of the campaign had lasting impact. The Rosetta Stone, the studies of ancient monuments, and the introduction of modern administrative reforms in occupied territories contributed to Napoleon's image as both warrior and enlightened ruler. Napoleon's experience in Egypt shaped his understanding of power, governance, and propaganda. He recognized the importance of blending military might with cultural and intellectual influence to legitimize rule. As first consul, Napoleon began transforming France with sweeping reforms that echoed the revolutionary ideals, yet consolidated his own authority. The Egyptian expedition was a pivotal moment in Napoleon's life, a bold gamble that showcased his audacity and vision but also exposed vulnerabilities. Though the campaign failed to secure a lasting French foothold in the region, it expanded Europe's knowledge of ancient Egypt and sparked a wave of Egyptomania that influenced art, architecture, and scholarship for decades. Napoleon's political acumen, honed amid the desert sands and shifting alliances, enabled him to pivot swiftly upon his return to France. His rise from military commander to first consul reshaped the course of French and world history. The lessons of Egypt, the blending of military power, political strategy, and cultural influence, became central to Napoleon's rule. His later campaigns and reforms would reflect this synthesis. As he stood on the threshold of supreme power, Napoleon's ambitions reached far beyond the battlefield. He was no longer merely a soldier of the revolution but a statesman and architect of a new European order. The Egyptian sands had tested him, but they had also prepared him for the monumental challenges ahead. In the waning days of 1799, France was a nation teetering on the edge of chaos. The revolutionary fervor that had once ignited hopes for liberty and equality was giving way to political fragmentation, economic turmoil, and war weariness. Into this fractured landscape stepped Napoleon Bonaparte, a man whose military prowess was matched only by his political ambition. The coup of 18 Brumaire, November 9, 1799, marked the dramatic turning point. With calculated precision, Napoleon and his allies dismantled the ineffective Directory, replacing it with the consulate, a new government structure in which Napoleon was the first consul, effectively holding supreme power. From the outset, Napoleon understood that military success alone would not secure his position. He embarked on sweeping reforms aimed at stabilizing France and consolidating authority. The administrative chaos that plagued the post-revolutionary government was replaced by an efficient bureaucracy staffed by capable officials loyal to the regime. His reforms spanned the legal system, education, finance, and religion. The Napoleonic Code, which would later become one of his most enduring legacies, standardized laws across the nation, emphasizing property rights, secular authority, and equality before the law. Napoleon also negotiated the Concordat of 1801 with the Catholic Church, mending relations that had been severely strained during the Revolution. This pragmatic move restored peace and won him support among religious citizens without undermining the secular state. Internationally, Napoleon was equally strategic. He forged peace with Austria and Britain temporarily, allowing him to focus on internal reforms and strengthening his grip on power. Yet, despite his careful consolidation, opposition simmered beneath the surface. Royalists, Republicans, and other factions viewed him with suspicion or outright hostility. Napoleon's response was a mix of repression and political savvy, silencing critics while cultivating public support through propaganda and spectacle. In 1802, Napoleon was named consul for life, a clear step toward monarchy in all but name. His popularity soared, fueled by military victories abroad and the promise of order at home. The final transformation came in 1804. In a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French, signaling not only his supreme authority but also a new era in French and European history. Napoleon's coronation as emperor on December 2, 1804, was a spectacle of unprecedented grandeur and symbolism. Choosing to place the crown upon his own head rather than receive it from the Pope, he signaled his belief that his authority derived from himself and the people, not from the church or divine right. This act encapsulated the contradictions of Napoleon's reign, a ruler who embraced revolutionary ideals of merit and secular power, yet who crowned himself monarch and wielded near-absolute authority. The new empire was a carefully crafted fusion of revolution and tradition. Napoleon maintained many reforms from the revolutionary era: legal equality, secular governance, and centralized administration. While restoring stability and order after years of turmoil, he surrounded himself with loyal family members and established a new aristocracy based on service to the state rather than birthright. His court, while lavish, was also a center of political control and propaganda. Internationally, Napoleon's coronation sent shockwaves across Europe. Monarchies viewed his ascent with alarm. Coalition wars erupted as powers like Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia sought to contain his expanding influence. Napoleon responded with military brilliance, leading campaigns that expanded French territory and influence. His strategic genius was matched by his ability to inspire loyalty among troops and citizens alike. Yet, his rise was not without controversy. His consolidation of power involved censorship, suppression of dissent, and political manipulation. Critics accused him of betraying the revolution's democratic ideals. Despite this, Napoleon remained immensely popular in France, where many credited him with restoring national pride and order. By the mid-1800s, Napoleon had transformed from revolutionary soldier to emperor, a figure whose ambition, vision, and contradictions would shape the destiny of Europe for years to come. Napoleon's consolidation of power extended beyond titles and ceremonies. It reshaped the very fabric of French society. He instituted sweeping reforms that touched law, education, administration, and the economy, aiming to create a modern, efficient state capable of supporting his imperial ambitions. The Napoleonic Code, enacted in 1804, became a cornerstone of his domestic policy. It codified civil law, emphasizing equality before the law, protection of property rights, and secular authority. While progressive in many respects, it also reinforced patriarchal authority and curtailed certain freedoms, reflecting Napoleon's pragmatic balance between reform and control. In education, Napoleon centralized and standardized the system. He founded the University of France, an institution designed to train loyal bureaucrats, engineers, and military officers. His education reforms aimed to cultivate a new elite aligned with state goals rather than aristocratic privilege. Administratively, Napoleon divided France into departments governed by prefects directly answerable to him. This centralization enhanced efficiency and reduced local corruption, strengthening the state's reach into every corner of the country. Economically, he stabilized the currency, reformed taxation, and promoted infrastructure projects to stimulate growth and unify the nation. On the international stage, Napoleon's imperial ambitions fueled relentless military campaigns. His Grande Armée, a formidable force composed of French and Allied troops, won a series of decisive victories that expanded France's influence across Europe. However, the cost of these campaigns was high. Prolonged warfare strained resources and caused widespread suffering. Napoleon's political opponents, both inside and outside France, sought to exploit these tensions. Despite challenges, Napoleon's ability to combine military prowess, administrative skill, and propaganda ensured his dominance. By 1806, he stood at the pinnacle of power, poised to reshape Europe according to his vision. As Napoleon's empire expanded, so did the complexities of governance and diplomacy. He faced the daunting task of balancing conquest with administration. Ambition with stability. One of his most significant challenges was managing the diverse territories and peoples absorbed into his empire. From the Iberian Peninsula to the German states, Napoleon installed relatives and loyalists as kings and governors, creating a network of client states bound to France. However, these arrangements were often fragile. Nationalist resistance, cultural differences, and local grievances simmered beneath the surface. In Spain, the Peninsular War erupted into a brutal guerrilla conflict that drained French resources and morale. Napoleon's diplomatic efforts sought to isolate Britain, France's perennial adversary. His continental system, an economic blockade designed to weaken British trade, aimed to force Britain into submission without direct invasion. While initially impactful, the blockade faced widespread evasion and enforcement difficulties. It strained relations with neutral and allied nations alike and contributed to growing unrest in occupied territories. Despite these setbacks, Napoleon remained a master of propaganda. He skillfully crafted an image of a benevolent ruler bringing order and progress to a fractured Europe. His court in Paris became a center of culture and innovation, patronizing the arts, sciences, and architecture. The Arc de Triomphe and the modernization of Paris reflected his desire to leave a lasting legacy. Yet, beneath the grandeur, cracks were appearing. The relentless pace of war, the pressures of ruling a vast empire, and the rising tide of opposition foreshadowed the challenges ahead. Napoleon's rise to power was a testament to his extraordinary talents and unyielding will, a story of ambition, reform, and the complex interplay of revolution and empire. Napoleon's journey from first consul to emperor marked a transformation not only for himself but for France and Europe. His leadership blended revolutionary ideals with autocratic control, creating a new model of governance that balanced order, progress, and personal authority. His reforms, legal, educational, administrative, laid the foundations for modern states, influencing countries far beyond France's borders. The grandeur of his reign, however, was shadowed by the costs of endless warfare. Battles won and empires expanded came at the price of countless lives and widespread upheaval. Napoleon's legacy remains deeply complex. A man of unparalleled genius and ambition, whose rise reshaped history and whose impact still echoes today as the empire reached its zenith. The stage was set for both unprecedented achievements and profound challenges that would define the next chapters of his life. By the early 1800s, Napoleon's military vision had evolved into the creation of the Grande Armée, a formidable and disciplined force capable of executing rapid, decisive campaigns across vast territories. Unlike previous armies, the Grande Armée was a well-organized blend of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, supported by efficient logistics and inspired leadership. Napoleon believed that the key to victory lay not just in numbers but in mobility, coordination, and morale. He revolutionized military training, emphasizing rigorous drills, swift marches, and flexible tactics. His officers were chosen for merit, and his troops were motivated by a combination of patriotism, loyalty, and the promise of glory. One of the defining characteristics of the Grande Armée was its ability to concentrate forces quickly at critical points. Napoleon's use of the corps system, a structure dividing the army into semi-independent units, allowed for operational flexibility and surprise. The army was multinational, drawing soldiers from across the French Empire and its allies. This diversity brought both strength and challenges, as Napoleon worked to unify disparate groups under a common purpose. The Grande Armée first proved its prowess in battles such as Austerlitz in 1805, often hailed as Napoleon's greatest victory. There, through masterful deception and timing, Napoleon's forces crushed the combined Austro-Russian armies, solidifying French dominance in Europe. Subsequent campaigns against Prussia at Jena and Auerstedt, and Russia at Friedland, further showcased the army's efficiency and Napoleon's strategic genius. These victories expanded French influence and forced many European powers into uneasy alliances or submission. However, the relentless pace of campaigns demanded extraordinary endurance from soldiers and commanders alike. Supply lines were stretched, harsh terrains and climates tested resilience, and the toll of constant warfare weighed heavily on men and resources. Despite these hardships, the Grande Armée remained a symbol of French military might, embodying the revolutionary ideals of meritocracy and discipline. Following the triumph at Austerlitz, Napoleon's Grande Army faced new challenges as it marched deeper into Europe's complex political and military landscape. The coalition forces, though battered, were determined to resist French expansion, and new alliances formed to counterbalance Napoleon's growing power. The Battle of Jena Auerstedt in 1806 was a decisive moment. Facing the Prussian army, Napoleon's forces executed rapid maneuvers and overwhelming attacks, shattering enemy lines. This victory resulted in the occupation of Berlin and the subjugation of Prussia, signaling the near-complete dominance of France over continental Europe. Napoleon's strategy combined relentless offense with psychological warfare. His soldiers were trained to exploit enemy weaknesses swiftly, and his commanders were empowered to make quick decisions on the battlefield. This decentralized command approach was innovative and effective. The campaign was also notable for the extensive use of artillery and cavalry in coordinated assaults. Napoleon understood the importance of firepower and mobility, deploying cannons and horsemen to break enemy formations and pursue fleeing forces. However, as the French Empire expanded, maintaining control over conquered territories became increasingly complex. Guerrilla warfare, especially in Spain during the Peninsular War, drained French resources and morale. These conflicts revealed the limits of military power when faced with determined local resistance. The Grande Army's greatest test came in 1807 at the Battle of Friedland against Russian forces. Napoleon's forces executed a brilliant offensive, forcing Russia to negotiate the Treaty of Tilsit, which temporarily aligned Russia with France. Despite battlefield successes, the immense scale of campaigns stretched logistics and exposed vulnerabilities. Maintaining supply lines over vast distances proved challenging, and harsh winters, particularly in Russia, tested the army's endurance. Napoleon's military campaigns reshaped Europe's political map, but foreshadowed the grueling struggles that would eventually contribute to the empire's decline as Napoleon's campaigns progressed. The Grande Armée became more than just a fighting force. It was a symbol of revolutionary ideals transformed into imperial power. The army's discipline, morale, and effectiveness were products of Napoleon's leadership and innovative strategies. One of the hallmarks of the Grande Armée was its ability to adapt rapidly to changing battlefield conditions. Napoleon's corps system allowed individual units to operate independently while remaining coordinated, enabling rapid concentration of forces where needed. Napoleon himself was often present on the front lines, inspiring his troops and making swift tactical decisions. His charismatic leadership fostered loyalty and courage, even in the face of adversity. However, the scale of his ambitions demanded ever larger armies, pulling soldiers from across the empire and beyond. This multinational force introduced complexities in language, culture, and loyalty, which Napoleon managed with varying success. The Peninsular War, 1808 to 1814, exposed the limits of French military might. Guerrilla tactics employed by Spanish fighters, coupled with British military support under leaders like the Duke of Wellington, bogged down French forces in a costly and protracted conflict. Meanwhile, Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812 marked a catastrophic turning point. The Grande Armée, numbering over 600,000 men, faced the vast Russian landscape and scorched-earth tactics employed by the retreating Russian army. The harsh winter, extended supply lines, and relentless harassment decimated Napoleon's forces. Of the vast army that marched into Russia, only a fraction returned. This disaster shattered the myth of the invincible Grande Armée and emboldened Napoleon's enemies. The Sixth Coalition formed, uniting powers determined to end his dominance. Despite setbacks, Napoleon's earlier battlefield innovations and victories had permanently altered the nature of warfare and statecraft in Europe. The retreat from Russia was a harrowing ordeal that exposed the vulnerabilities of the Grande Armée. Starvation, freezing temperatures, and constant attacks by Russian forces decimated Napoleon's once mighty army. The brutal conditions forged a narrative of tragedy and resilience, forever etched in military history. This catastrophic loss weakened Napoleon's grip on Europe, inspiring the formation of the Sixth Coalition, an alliance including Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden, determined to end French hegemony. In 1813, the Battle of Leipzig, known as the Battle of Nations, became the largest engagement of the Napoleonic Wars. Facing overwhelming enemy numbers, Napoleon's forces fought fiercely but were ultimately defeated, signaling the decline of his empire. Despite the loss, Napoleon's tactical brilliance shone through, as he skillfully managed retreats and delayed enemy advances, preserving what remained of his forces. The Grande Army's resilience, despite adversity, showcased the discipline and loyalty Napoleon had instilled. However, the tides had turned irrevocably as the coalition armies advanced toward France. Napoleon prepared for the defense of his homeland, rallying his troops and citizens in a desperate bid to maintain his empire. The battlefields of Europe had been reshaped by Napoleon's campaigns, strategically, politically, and culturally. His military innovations influenced warfare for generations. Yet, the relentless wars also sowed the seeds of his downfall, as the costs of conquest, resistance, and attrition mounted beyond sustainable limits. The saga of the Grande Armée remains one of the most remarkable chapters in military history. From its disciplined ranks to its innovative tactics, it epitomized Napoleon's genius and ambition. Though ultimately humbled by the harsh realities of extended warfare, the army's campaigns reshaped Europe's borders and power dynamics. Napoleon's legacy as a military commander endures not only through his victories but also through the enduring lessons his campaigns offer about leadership, strategy, and the costs of empire. By 1814, the tides had turned dramatically against Napoleon. The costly campaigns, especially the disastrous Russian invasion, had severely weakened the Grande Armée. European powers, united in the Sixth Coalition, pressed into France from multiple fronts. Paris fell in March 1814 after a series of defeats, forcing Napoleon to abdicate the throne. His enemies, wary of his enduring charisma and leadership, exiled him to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. Though given sovereignty over Elba, Napoleon was effectively removed from European power struggles on Elba. Napoleon lived under guarded freedom, but his restless spirit and ambition remained undiminished. He monitored the political situation in France, knowing the country was unstable under the restored Bourbon monarchy in February 1815. Seizing the moment, Napoleon escaped Elba and made his dramatic return to France. His march northward was met with little resistance. Soldiers and citizens rallied to his cause, disillusioned by the regime's failings. This period, known as the 100 Days, saw Napoleon reclaim power and begin reorganizing the French state and military in preparation for renewed conflict. But European powers quickly mobilized once more. The coalition armies assembled to confront Napoleon, leading to the decisive Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. Despite his tactical skill and determination, Napoleon suffered a crushing defeat. This battle marked the end of his rule and the Napoleonic Wars. Following Waterloo, Napoleon was captured and exiled to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he would spend the remainder of his life. His fall from emperor to exile encapsulated the dramatic rise and fall of one of history's most compelling figures, a man whose ambitions reshaped the world, but whose legacy remains complex and contested. Napoleon's exile to Elba was both a punishment and a paradox. Although stripped of his empire, he retained the title of emperor and ruled the island with almost regal authority. He undertook reforms to improve Elba's infrastructure, economy, and administration, demonstrating his relentless drive for governance even in confinement. However, the political climate in France was volatile. The Bourbon monarchy, restored under Louis XVIII, struggled to gain legitimacy and popular support. The French people, exhausted by war and wary of royalist reaction, remained divided and restless. Napoleon closely watched these developments from Elba, sending envoys and maintaining secret contacts with supporters. His legendary charisma ensured that loyalty to him did not wane in February 1815. Sensing an opportunity, Napoleon escaped Elba with a small force. Landing on the French mainland, he embarked on his 100 Days campaign to reclaim power. His advance was marked by a remarkable display of popular support. Troops sent to arrest him instead joined his ranks. As he approached Paris, crowds hailed him as a liberator, and the Bourbon king fled. Reinstated as emperor, Napoleon moved swiftly to consolidate power. He reformed the army, rallied the nation, and prepared to confront the Allied forces determined to end his rule. Yet, his return reignited old conflicts. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia united against him once again, determined to restore the European balance of power. The stage was set for the fateful confrontation at Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, stands as one of the most decisive and dramatic clashes in military history. Napoleon faced a coalition army led by the Duke of Wellington, alongside Prussian forces commanded by Field Marshal Blücher. Despite commanding a well-trained and battle-hardened army, Napoleon confronted a coalition that was equally determined to end his reign. The battlefield, near modern-day Belgium, became a crucible of strategy, courage, and fate. Napoleon's initial assaults sought to break the coalition's line through coordinated infantry, cavalry, and artillery attacks. However, Wellington's defensive positioning on the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean and the timely arrival of Prussian reinforcements complicated the French assault. Throughout the day, fierce fighting ensued, with massive casualties on both sides. Napoleon's tactical decisions, though bold, were hampered by delayed attacks and communication issues among his commanders. The turning point came when Blücher's Prussian army engaged the French right flank, stretching Napoleon's forces thin. The coalition's combined pressure overwhelmed the French army, forcing a chaotic retreat. Waterloo marked the definitive end of Napoleon's rule and the Napoleonic Wars. The defeat shattered his dreams of empire and altered the geopolitical landscape of Europe. Captured by the British, Napoleon was sent to the remote island of St. Helena, where he lived in exile until his death in 1821. Despite his fall, Napoleon's impact on military strategy, governance, law, and culture endured, securing his place as one of history's most fascinating and influential figures. Napoleon's exile to St. Helena was a stark contrast to the grandeur of his imperial days. The island, a remote volcanic outcrop in the South Atlantic, was chosen to prevent any possibility of escape or resurgence. During his final years, Napoleon lived under constant surveillance but retained a small entourage of loyal followers. He spent much of his time dictating memoirs and reflecting on his life, ambitions, and legacy. The harsh isolation and health challenges took a toll on him. Rumors about the cause of his death, whether from stomach cancer or poisoning, have persisted for centuries, adding to the mystery surrounding his final days. Despite his fall, Napoleon remained a figure of fascination across Europe and beyond. His life story inspired countless books, artworks, and political debates about leadership, power, and revolution. The Congress of Vienna, convened after his defeat, sought to restore balance and stability in Europe, redrawing borders and establishing a framework that would last for decades. Napoleon's legacy is complex. He was a reformer who modernized law and administration, a military genius who reshaped warfare, and a ruler whose ambition brought both glory and devastation. His story is a testament to the heights of human ambition and the fragile nature of power. Napoleon Bonaparte's influence extended far beyond the battlefields where he carved his empire. His vision and reforms transformed the political, legal, and social landscapes of Europe and continue to resonate worldwide. Central to his legacy was the Napoleonic Code, a comprehensive legal framework that codified laws and principles which would inspire legal systems across the globe. Introduced in 1804, it emphasized equality before the law, protection of property rights, secular governance, and the abolition of feudal privileges. Many countries, including those in Europe, the Americas, and beyond, adapted elements of this code into their own legal systems, marking a profound shift towards modern civil law. Napoleon's military strategies and organizational reforms revolutionized warfare. His emphasis on mobility, rapid concentration of forces, and combined arms tactics reshaped military doctrines. The core system he pioneered enhanced flexibility and efficiency, influencing armies well into the 20th century. Politically, Napoleon redrew the map of Europe. His conquests dismantled the old feudal order and spread nationalist ideas. Though his empire eventually collapsed, the national identities and movements he stirred contributed to future unifications and independence struggles. Beyond politics and war, Napoleon's cultural impact was immense. He patronized the arts, science, and education, fostering a legacy of enlightenment and progress. Architectural feats such as the Arc de Triomphe and the modernization of Paris still stand as monuments to his reign. However, his legacy is complicated by the costs of his ambitions, the wars that devastated millions and reshaped Europe through conflict and upheaval. Historians continue to debate his role as either a tyrant or a visionary. Napoleon remains a symbol of leadership, ambition, and the complex interplay of power and reform. A figure whose story captivates and challenges generations. Napoleon's legacy extends deeply into the political philosophies that shaped the modern world. His promotion of meritocracy challenged the entrenched aristocratic privileges, emphasizing ability and achievement over birthright. This principle opened doors for talented individuals and redefined social mobility. The centralization of state power under Napoleon created a model of governance that balanced efficiency with control. His administrative reforms streamlined bureaucracies, improved tax collection, and established standardized education systems. These changes served as templates for emerging nation-states throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Internationally, the Congress of Vienna 1814–1815 sought to undo Napoleon's territorial rearrangements and restore old monarchies, but the nationalist and liberal ideas he had spread could not be fully suppressed. Revolutions, unifications, and reforms throughout Europe bore the imprint of Napoleonic influence. Culturally, Napoleon inspired a mythos that transcended his life. From literature to film, from political discourse to popular memory, he has been portrayed as a heroic liberator, a ruthless dictator, a military genius, and a tragic figure. The term Napoleon complex entered popular psychology, reflecting cultural fascination with his stature and personality. Statues, paintings, and monuments around the world commemorate his achievements and controversies alike and education. Napoleon's reforms created institutions that educated generations of engineers, administrators, and military leaders, laying foundations for France's modern intellectual life. His life story, full of dramatic highs and lows, has been the subject of countless biographies, novels, and analyses, ensuring that Napoleon remains a subject of enduring fascination. Despite his many accomplishments, Napoleon's legacy also includes the darker consequences of his reign. The Napoleonic Wars resulted in immense human suffering. Millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives, and many regions experienced devastation and disruption. His authoritarian style of leadership curtailed freedoms and established a police state that suppressed dissent. Censorship of the press, political persecution, and strict control over public opinion were tools he used to maintain power. Yet, even critics acknowledge that Napoleon's reforms laid the groundwork for the modern state. His secular legal code, efficient bureaucracy, and centralized education system influenced governance well beyond France. Napoleon's life also illustrates the fragile balance between ambition and hubris. His ultimate downfall serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of power and the consequences of overreach. In many ways, the duality of Napoleon's legacy, as both a revolutionary modernizer and a conqueror, mirrors the complexities of history itself. His impact continues to spark debates among historians, political theorists, and cultural commentators, reflecting the enduring relevance of his life and actions. Napoleon's enduring appeal also lies in his charismatic leadership and vision. He inspired loyalty and admiration through his ability to articulate a grand vision for France and Europe. His speeches, writings, and personal example motivated millions, fostering a sense of purpose and identity. The figure of Napoleon became a symbol for later leaders and movements seeking to combine strong leadership with reformist zeal. His ability to navigate the tumultuous aftermath of revolution and war demonstrated a unique blend of pragmatism and idealism in popular culture. Napoleon's image has been adapted in various forms, from heroic epics to critical portrayals, highlighting his multifaceted nature. His life story is a timeless narrative of rise, fall, and legacy that resonates universally. Furthermore, Napoleon's impact on military strategy and organization has influenced commanders from the 19th century to modern times. Concepts such as rapid mobilization, corps structure, and combined arms tactics remain foundational in military doctrine. Educational institutions and monuments worldwide continue to study and commemorate Napoleon's contributions, ensuring that his legacy remains alive in collective memory as history moves forward. The lessons and contradictions of Napoleon's life serve as a powerful reminder of the complexities of power, leadership, and human ambition. The Napoleonic Wars, spanning from 1803 to 1815, were among the most significant conflicts in European history. Their impact extended far beyond the battlefield, reshaping political boundaries, social structures, and national identities. At the outset, Napoleon's military campaigns sought to spread the ideals of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity, albeit under imperial domination. His victories dismantled the old feudal order, abolishing many aristocratic privileges and outdated institutions. The redrawing of Europe's map saw the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and the rise of new states aligned with or dependent on France. The Confederation of the Rhine, created by Napoleon, brought together German states under French influence, planting the seeds for later German unification. Meanwhile, the spread of nationalism became a powerful force. Occupied peoples, inspired by revolutionary ideals and resentment of foreign rule, began to assert their cultural identities and political aspirations. This was especially evident in Spain, Germany, and Italy. The wars also accelerated military and technological innovation. The concept of total war emerged, mobilizing entire societies for conflict and involving unprecedented levels of conscription and resource allocation. Diplomatically, the Napoleonic era saw the rise of coalition warfare, where multiple great powers united to balance French dominance. This set a precedent for future international alliances and rivalries. Despite the devastation, the Napoleonic Wars laid the groundwork for modern Europe, influencing political ideologies, state-building, and international law. The collapse of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806 marked a profound shift in European politics. For centuries, this sprawling entity had been a patchwork of semi-autonomous states, loosely united under the Habsburg Emperor. Napoleon's creation of the Confederation of the Rhine effectively replaced this old order with a new political reality, one aligned with French interests and governance models. This transformation accelerated nationalist sentiments among German-speaking peoples, who began to envision a unified nation-state. Figures such as Johann Gottfried Herder and the early Romantics celebrated the concept of a shared language, culture, and history, ideals that would eventually fuel the movements for unification later in the 19th century. In Italy, Napoleon's campaigns similarly disrupted the fragmented political landscape. He reorganized the peninsula into client republics and kingdoms ruled by his relatives and loyalists. While this brought some modernization, it also stirred Italian nationalism and desires for independence. Setting the stage for the Risorgimento, Spain's Peninsular War became a symbol of popular resistance and guerrilla warfare. Spanish patriots, supported by British forces under Wellington, fought a brutal and protracted conflict against French occupation. This war drained French resources and morale and is often credited with weakening Napoleon's overall military position. The Napoleonic Wars also had profound social consequences. The massive mobilization of men through conscription altered demographics and disrupted traditional social structures. Women's roles changed as they managed homes and economies in men's absence. Economic warfare through the continental system sought to isolate Britain but resulted in widespread smuggling, economic hardship, and dissent within Europe, complicating Napoleon's control. The era's complex alliances and betrayals illustrated the shifting nature of diplomacy and power politics, where pragmatism often trumped ideology. The widespread impact of the Napoleonic Wars extended beyond Europe's borders. The conflicts disrupted trade and colonial holdings, influencing global power dynamics in the Americas. The weakening of European colonial powers during the Napoleonic era created openings for independence movements. The Spanish colonies in Latin America seized the moment, launching revolutions that would reshape the continent. Napoleon's own ambitions in the New World, such as the ill-fated attempt to reassert French control over Saint-Domingue, modern Haiti, failed dramatically. The Haitian Revolution, led by Toussaint Louverture, resulted in the first successful slave revolt and the establishment of the First Black Republic, a profound challenge to colonial and racial hierarchies in the United States. The Napoleonic Wars influenced foreign policy, trade, and territorial expansion. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803, through which France sold vast territories to the U.S., was directly related to Napoleon's shifting priorities and financial needs. Military innovations during the Napoleonic era also spread worldwide. Concepts of conscription, corps organization, and combined arms tactics were studied and adapted by armies globally. The wars catalyzed technological advances in weaponry, logistics, and communications, laying groundwork for modern military science. Ultimately, the Napoleonic Wars forged a new world order, with lasting consequences for international relations, state sovereignty, and national identity. The conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars was marked by the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, where European powers convened to restore balance and prevent future widespread conflicts. The Congress aimed to reestablish monarchies, redraw borders, and create a system of collective security known as the Concert of Europe. This diplomatic effort reflected both a reaction against revolutionary ideals and a pragmatic attempt to maintain peace. The territorial rearrangements often ignored nationalist aspirations, sowing seeds of future unrest and revolutions. Nevertheless, the Congress established principles of diplomacy and international relations that influenced global politics well into the 20th century. Napoleon's legacy within this transformation was paradoxical. While his conquests were rolled back, the ideas of legal equality, secular governance, and national self-determination persisted. The Napoleonic era thus became a turning point, closing the chapter on old regimes and opening the door to modern nation-states, constitutionalism, and international law. The Napoleonic Wars transformed Europe from a fragmented, feudal continent into a stage for emerging modern powers and ideologies, setting the course for the turbulent century ahead. Napoleon Bonaparte's personal life was as complex and dramatic as his public career. Behind the towering figure of the emperor was a man driven by passion, ambition, and the complexities of human relationships. His first marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais was marked by deep affection, political alliance, and eventual heartbreak. Josephine, a widow with 2 children, was a socialite who brought connections and elegance to Napoleon's rising status. Their union began with a whirlwind romance, but as Napoleon's empire expanded, Josephine's inability to produce an heir became a critical issue. Despite their emotional bond, Napoleon divorced Josephine in 1810 to secure the dynasty's future, marrying Marie-Louise of Austria shortly thereafter. Marie-Louise, daughter of the Austrian emperor, represented a strategic alliance, but their relationship was more formal and less passionate. Together they had one son, Napoleon II, known as the King of Rome, symbolizing the continuation of Napoleon's legacy. Napoleon's family relationships extended beyond his wives. He was known to be devoted to his siblings, many of whom he installed as rulers or influential figures throughout Europe, weaving a network of familial power. Yet, his personal life was shadowed by controversies and rumors, infidelities, political manipulations, and strained relationships. Understanding Napoleon's private world provides a fuller picture of the man behind the legend, a figure shaped by both love and power, ambition and vulnerability. Napoleon's marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais was a union marked by both passion and political necessity. Josephine, born Marie-Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagerie, was a widow of the guillotined aristocrat Alexander de Beauharnais. Despite her turbulent past, she captured Napoleon's heart during their first meeting in 1795. Their relationship was tempestuous, filled with love letters, jealousy, and reconciliations. Josephine was known for her charm and grace, helping Napoleon navigate Parisian society as he rose through the ranks. However, their inability to produce an heir increasingly troubled Napoleon. The emperor's desire for a successor was not just personal but a political imperative. This led to their painful divorce in 1810, a move that Josephine accepted with dignity, though it broke both their hearts. Soon after, Napoleon married Marie-Louise of Austria, daughter of Emperor Francis I. This marriage symbolized a political alliance aimed at stabilizing relations with Austria, a former enemy. Marie-Louise was younger and less experienced in politics, and their relationship lacked the fiery passion of his first marriage but was marked by mutual respect. Their son, Napoleon François Charles Joseph Bonaparte, born in 1811, was given the title King of Rome, symbolizing the hope for a dynastic future. Napoleon's family was a source of both support and political maneuvering. He placed siblings on thrones of kingdoms he controlled, such as Joseph Bonaparte in Spain and Louis Bonaparte in Holland, strengthening his grip on Europe through family ties. Despite his public image, Napoleon's personal life was filled with rumors of affairs and complex relationships. His charismatic personality attracted many, but also led to scandals that fueled gossip in royal courts and beyond. His relationships reflected the tensions between his private desires and public responsibilities, highlighting the human side of a man often seen only as a military and political figure. Napoleon's relationship with Josephine, despite their divorce, remained deeply emotional. Josephine continued to correspond with Napoleon, and their affection endured beyond political necessity. She famously said, "I cannot live without loving you," reflecting the depth of their bond. After his marriage to Marie-Louise, Napoleon's public duties often kept him away from his family. Marie-Louise, though initially hesitant, adapted to her role as empress and mother, navigating court politics with caution. Napoleon's siblings played vital roles in his empire building. His brother Joseph Bonaparte was installed as King of Spain but faced resistance and eventual failure during the Peninsular War. Louis Bonaparte ruled the Kingdom of Holland but often acted independently, sometimes frustrating Napoleon. His sister Caroline Bonaparte married Joachim Murat, one of Napoleon's most trusted marshals and King of Naples. Their relationship was marked by ambition and political intrigue. Napoleon's extended family network demonstrated both loyalty and complexity, as ambitions, rivalries, and political realities intertwined. Throughout his life, Napoleon's private affairs and public image were often at odds. His reputation for both charm and ruthlessness created a persona that fascinated contemporaries and continues to captivate historians. His personal story reveals the sacrifices and compromises behind the grandeur, illustrating the intricate balance between power and intimacy. Controversies also surrounded Napoleon's personal conduct and character. Some contemporaries and later critics painted him as a ruthless opportunist, whose ambition often trumped morality. Others saw him as a visionary leader burdened by the pressures of his epoch. His rumored affairs included relationships with various women, from aristocrats to commoners, reflecting the complex intersection of personal desire and political alliances. While some liaisons were discreet, others sparked scandal and political tension. Napoleon's attitude toward family was pragmatic but also affectionate. He was deeply involved in the upbringing of his legitimate son, Napoleon II, though the boy's fate was tragically cut short by political exile and ill health. Despite the grandeur of his reign, Napoleon's personal life was marked by loneliness and loss. The repeated wars and political struggles strained his relationships and left emotional scars. His final years in exile on St. Helena were spent reflecting on these aspects of his life, as he dictated memoirs and corresponded with friends and foes alike. The complexities of Napoleon's personal life add depth to his historical image, reminding us that beyond the emperor was a man shaped by love, ambition, and human frailty. Napoleon Bonaparte's influence extended far beyond the battlefield, fundamentally transforming the political and administrative structures of France and, by extension, much of Europe. His reforms laid the groundwork for modern state governance, emphasizing efficiency, centralization, and uniformity. At the core of his political vision was the consolidation of power into a strong, centralized authority. After the chaos of the French Revolution, which had fragmented and destabilized the nation, Napoleon sought to restore order and control through a carefully designed bureaucracy. One of his first acts as first consul was the establishment of the prefect system. Prefects were appointed officials who represented the central government in each department, administrative region, ensuring that laws and policies were uniformly implemented across the country. This system curtailed local aristocratic influence and promoted loyalty to the state. In parallel, Napoleon restructured the judiciary to create a coherent legal framework. His Napoleonic Code, enacted in 1804, standardized laws regarding property, contracts, family, and civil rights. It abolished feudal privileges and emphasized equality before the law. The code became a model for many legal systems worldwide and remains influential today. Education was another pillar of Napoleon's reforms. Recognizing that a skilled bureaucracy and military required educated citizens, he established the lycées, secondary schools designed to train future civil servants and officers. He also founded specialized institutions, such as the École Polytechnique, emphasizing science and engineering. Napoleon's fiscal reforms improved tax collection and financial administration, stabilizing the economy after revolutionary turmoil. He created the Bank of France to manage currency and credit, helping to finance both the government and military campaigns. Though authoritarian in nature, these reforms modernized the state, enhancing its capacity to govern efficiently and project power. Central to Napoleon's vision was the balance between authority and meritocracy. He believed that talent and loyalty should be rewarded, rather than birthright alone. This approach was revolutionary in a Europe still dominated by hereditary aristocracies. The Legion of Honor, established in 1802, exemplified this principle. It recognized military and civil achievements regardless of social class, promoting a new elite based on service to the state. This institution not only motivated individuals but also helped cement Napoleon's control by binding recipients to his regime. Napoleon's control over the press and public opinion was tightly managed. While censorship curtailed dissent, propaganda glorified his achievements and projected an image of a benevolent ruler. This dual strategy maintained stability and popular support. His reforms also extended to religion. Through the Concordat of 1801 with the Catholic Church, Napoleon restored some church influence while keeping it firmly under state authority. This pragmatic agreement helped pacify religious tensions and integrated the church into his political system. Despite his centralized control, Napoleon's administration was marked by efficiency and professionalism. The civil service was staffed by educated individuals selected for competence, contributing to effective governance. These reforms provided the administrative backbone for Napoleon's ambitious military campaigns and imperial governance, ensuring that the French state could sustain prolonged conflict and territorial expansion. Napoleon's impact on governance extended beyond France's borders. As his armies conquered or influenced much of Europe, he implemented many of his reforms in satellite states and allied kingdoms. In the Kingdom of Italy, the Confederation of the Rhine, and other client states, Napoleonic legal codes replaced fragmented feudal laws. Centralized administrations were established, modernizing governance and laying foundations for future nation-states. These changes often conflicted with local traditions and elites, generating resistance, but also fostering the spread of revolutionary and nationalist ideals. Napoleon's reforms in education were equally transformative. The lycée system created a standardized curriculum emphasizing science, mathematics, and classical studies, preparing students for careers in administration, engineering, and the military. He promoted scientific advancement by supporting institutions such as the Institut de France and encouraging exploration and innovation. Financial reforms included the introduction of uniform currency systems in occupied territories, facilitating trade and integration. However, the demands of war strained these systems. Taxation increased, conscription intensified, and censorship tightened, revealing the limits of Napoleon's administrative model. Still, many of these reforms endured long after his fall, influencing 19th-century European state-building and modernization efforts. Despite the authoritarian nature of his regime, Napoleon's reforms aimed to create a more rational, orderly society. His codification of laws helped abolish arbitrary privileges and established clear legal rights and obligations. His administrative innovations centralized decision-making but also professionalized government, fostering a cadre of trained officials. However, Napoleon's reforms were not without contradictions. While promoting equality before the law, his regime restricted political freedoms and imposed strict controls on speech and assembly. Moreover, his ambitions led to prolonged warfare that drained resources and caused widespread suffering. Nevertheless, Napoleon's political and administrative legacy shaped modern governance. Many of his ideas about the state, law, and education persist in contemporary institutions. His reforms bridged the gap between the revolutionary ideals of liberty and equality and the practical needs of governance and order. Napoleon Bonaparte is often hailed as one of history's greatest military strategists and tacticians. His innovations on the battlefield transformed the art of war, influencing military thought well beyond his era. Central to his success was the concept of mobility. Unlike traditional armies that moved slowly and in rigid formations, Napoleon emphasized rapid marches, surprise attacks, and the concentration of forces at decisive points. This allowed him to outmaneuver larger or better-equipped enemies. He refined the corps system, dividing his army into semi-independent units capable of operating separately or together. This structure gave his forces flexibility and resilience, allowing for simultaneous offensives on multiple fronts. Napoleon was a master of combined arms tactics, integrating infantry, cavalry, and artillery to complement each other's strengths. His use of artillery as a mobile, offensive weapon was particularly innovative, often breaking enemy lines and morale before infantry attacks. His keen sense of terrain and timing allowed him to exploit enemy weaknesses, striking at vulnerable moments. Battles like Austerlitz, 1805, showcased his ability to use deception and strategic positioning to achieve overwhelming victory. Logistics and supply were also a focus. Napoleon improved army provisioning and organization, enabling sustained campaigns over vast distances. Despite his brilliance, Napoleon's military career was not without failures. Overextension, harsh winters, and determined coalitions eventually wore down his forces. Nevertheless, his military legacy endures, With his principles studied in academies worldwide. One of Napoleon's key innovations was his use of strategic reserves. By holding back elite troops or cavalry, he could reinforce critical points or exploit breakthroughs dynamically during battle. He also emphasized centralized command with delegated execution. While overall strategy was controlled by Napoleon, his corps commanders were empowered to make tactical decisions on the ground, allowing faster responses and adaptability. Napoleon's understanding of psychological warfare set him apart. He cultivated a reputation for invincibility, often demoralizing opponents before battle even began. His charismatic leadership inspired loyalty among his troops, fostering esprit de corps. The use of intelligence and reconnaissance was another hallmark. Napoleon employed scouts, spies, and local informants to gather detailed information about enemy movements and terrain, allowing him to plan with precision. Napoleon also revolutionized the artillery's role. He increased the number of cannons, standardized calibers, and improved mobility. Artillery barrages were timed to soften enemy defenses before infantry assaults, a tactic that proved devastating. His campaigns demonstrated innovative siege warfare techniques, combining engineering skills with artillery to capture fortresses rapidly. However, Napoleon's reliance on rapid offensive operations sometimes led to overextended supply lines and fatigue among his troops. His failure in the Russian campaign of 1812 illustrated the limits of his military model under extreme conditions. Despite setbacks, Napoleon's military innovations reshaped warfare and continue to influence military strategy today. Napoleon's campaigns are notable for their scale and complexity. His ability to coordinate large armies across vast distances was unprecedented. The Grande Armée, his main field force, exemplified his organizational genius. At its height, it consisted of over 600,000 soldiers from diverse backgrounds, including French nationals and Allied contingents. Napoleon instituted rigorous training and discipline, ensuring that his troops could execute complex maneuvers and maintain cohesion under fire. His innovative use of corps d'armée allowed each corps to operate independently for days, living off local resources, yet able to regroup rapidly for major battles. The marshals of France, his trusted generals, played crucial roles in executing his vision. Figures such as Ney, Murat, and Davout demonstrated remarkable skill and loyalty. Napoleon's tactical brilliance was also evident in his use of feints and diversions, confusing enemies about his true intentions and forcing them into disadvantageous positions. Campaigns like the Ulm maneuver in 1805 and the Italian campaign showcased his mastery in outflanking and encirclement, leading to decisive victories without prolonged sieges. His Battle of Austerlitz remains a classic study in battlefield deception and exploitation of terrain, often cited as his greatest victory. Yet, the scale of his operations also introduced vulnerabilities, including communication delays and supply challenges. Napoleon's military art was a blend of innovation, leadership, and sheer audacity. While celebrated for his battlefield prowess, Napoleon's military legacy also includes the sobering lessons of hubris and overreach. His invasion of Russia in 1812, one of the largest military campaigns in history, ended in disaster. The vast distances, scorched earth tactics by Russian forces, and brutal winter decimated the Grande Armée. Marking a turning point in his fortunes, Napoleon's downfall was hastened by the Sixth Coalition, whose combined forces overwhelmed France after years of exhausting conflict. Despite defeat, his strategies and reforms profoundly influenced military doctrine. The principles of mass, maneuver, and morale that he championed became cornerstones of modern warfare. Napoleon's emphasis on flexible command structures, speed, and decisive action echoed through the 19th and 20th centuries, informing the campaigns of generals like Moltke, Joffre, and Patton. His integration of political objectives with military strategy presaged modern concepts of total war and national mobilization. Today, military academies worldwide study Napoleon's campaigns not only for tactical lessons but also as examples of leadership, innovation, and the complexities of war. Napoleon's military genius, with all its triumphs and failures, remains a defining chapter in the history of warfare. By 1812, the foundations of Napoleon's empire were beginning to crack. The disastrous Russian campaign marked the beginning of the end. Over 400,000 men of the Grande Armée had marched eastward. Fewer than 100,000 limped back. The Russian winter, scorched earth tactics, and guerrilla resistance had broken the myth of Napoleon's invincibility. The collapse emboldened Europe's major powers, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, to form the Sixth Coalition, determined to end Napoleonic domination once and for all. A series of grueling battles across Germany and France in 1813 and 1814 further depleted Napoleon's forces. The Battle of Leipzig, known as the Battle of the Nations, the emperor suffered one of his most decisive defeats. Surrounded and outnumbered, Napoleon retreated to France, only to face fresh invasions from multiple directions. Paris fell in March 1814. Facing pressure from his marshals and political elites, Napoleon abdicated the throne on April 6, 1814. In a surprising gesture of diplomacy, the victorious allies allowed him to retain the title of emperor and granted him sovereignty over the tiny Mediterranean island of Elba, off the coast of Italy. Thus began Napoleon's first exile, a brief period of reflection, governance, and brooding ambition. He ruled Elba with energy, introducing agricultural reforms, roads, and administration as if still leading an empire. But Europe, though restored to monarchy under Louis XVIII, remained uneasy. France was restless, its people disillusioned by Bourbon rule. Napoleon, ever the opportunist, saw his chance. On February 26, 1815, he escaped Elba aboard the brigand Constant, landing on the French coast. There, he began his dramatic return march to Paris. The 100 Days had begun. Napoleon's return to France in March 1815 was nothing short of legendary. With only a few hundred loyal soldiers, he marched north from the coast, unsure of how the public or the military would respond. The French king, Louis XVIII, panicked and ordered troops to intercept the exile. But as Napoleon approached the army sent to arrest him, he stepped forward alone, opened his coat, and shouted, "If any of you will shoot your emperor, here I am." Instead of arresting him, the soldiers erupted into cheers. "Vive l'Empereur!" rang out, and Napoleon was once again at the helm of a growing army. Each day, as he continued his march toward Paris, more supporters joined. The king fled the capital. On March 20, 1815, Napoleon triumphantly entered Paris. The people welcomed him not only as a hero of legend but also as a symbol of national pride and defiance against foreign powers. But Napoleon's return ignited alarm across Europe. The coalition powers, Britain, Prussia, Russia, and Austria, declared him an outlaw and began raising armies once more. Napoleon, now with only 100 days to secure his throne, moved swiftly. He promised peace, reformed the government, and attempted to rally the nation. But the world was watching, and the armies of Europe were already on the move. Knowing he could not wait for France to be invaded again, Napoleon took the initiative. In June 1815, he marched into Belgium, hoping to strike swiftly at the divided Anglo-Prussian forces. It was a bold gamble, brilliant in its conception, but ultimately, fate would not be kind. The final act of Napoleon's military saga unfolded on the muddy fields near a small Belgian village, Waterloo. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington's Anglo-Allied army, while Marshal Blucher's Prussian forces hurried to reinforce from the east. Napoleon's plan was to defeat each army separately before they could unite. The day began with confidence. Napoleon believed that his veteran troops, though outnumbered, could shatter Wellington's lines with superior tactics and timing. His opening attack on the farm of Hougoumont was fierce but failed to deliver a breakthrough. Later, a massive French assault at La Haye Sainte and a thundering cavalry charge led by Marshal Ney battered the Allied lines. But the British held firm. As the day dragged on and the sun dipped low, disaster struck. The Prussian army finally arrived. Blucher's forces attacked Napoleon's right flank, overwhelming Marshal Grouchy's delayed reinforcements and stretching French lines to the breaking point. Napoleon committed his final reserve, the elite Imperial Guard, undefeated until that day. As they advanced across the field in perfect formation, all eyes watched. But the British held their fire until the Guard was within close range. Then came the volley. The Guard staggered, then broke. Cries of "La Garde recule! The Guard is retreating!" echoed in disbelief. Panic spread. What remained of the French army dissolved into chaos and retreat. Napoleon had lost not just a battle, but the empire itself. After the shattering defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon fled the battlefield. He returned to Paris in disgrace, his aura of invincibility finally broken. The Chamber of Deputies, once loyal, now turned cold. The politicians demanded abdication. On June 22, 1815, for the second and final time, Napoleon abdicated the throne. He had hoped to escape to America, to begin a new life far from the reaches of Europe's monarchs. But the British Navy patrolled the Atlantic. Rather than risk capture at sea, Napoleon surrendered himself to the British, famously declaring, "I come to throw myself upon the hospitality of the British people." It was a calculated appeal, but the British government would not risk another return. This time, they chose a remote exile that would place him far beyond any chance of escape. On October 15, 1815, Napoleon arrived at St. Helena, a windswept volcanic island in the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from Europe. His residence would be Longwood House, damp, bleak, and constantly monitored by guards and British officials. Here, Napoleon passed his final years, accompanied by a small circle of loyal followers. Though defeated, he never surrendered his pride. He dictated his memoirs, argued politics, reflected on strategy, and tried to shape the narrative of his life. The former emperor, once feared and worshipped by millions, now paced the garden of a lonely house, surrounded by wind and sea. On May 5, 1821, after a slow decline, Napoleon Bonaparte died, likely of stomach cancer. He was 51 years old. His last words, "France, the army, the head of the army, Josephine." A simple epitaph for a man who had shaken the world. Napoleon Bonaparte died in exile, far from the battlefields and palaces where he had once ruled, but death only amplified his legend. In the years that followed his passing, Napoleon's image grew ever larger. No longer merely a man, but a myth, a symbol, a mirror in which generations would see both greatness and danger. His political legacy was profound. The Napoleonic Code, introduced in 1804, remains one of the most influential legal documents in history. Its principles, equality before the law, secular governance, property rights, and the abolition of feudal privilege, became the foundation of legal systems in countries across Europe, Latin America, and beyond. Even today, echoes of his civil code shape law in France, Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and former colonies across the globe. Napoleon's administrative reforms outlived his empire. Centralized government, professional civil service, public education systems, and state-financed infrastructure were all strengthened or introduced under his rule. These became hallmarks of the modern nation-state. His approach to military organization and strategy redefined warfare. The core system, mobile artillery, and emphasis on speed, initiative, and morale became standard in military doctrines worldwide. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, commanders from Helmuth von Moltke to Douglas MacArthur studied Napoleon's campaigns at West Point, Sandhurst, and St. Cyr. But Napoleon's legacy extended beyond policy and tactics. It seeped into the collective imagination of the West. Romantics saw him as a tragic hero. Conservatives vilified him as a tyrant. Revolutionaries admired him as a man who bent the world to his will. Writers like Victor Hugo, Leo Tolstoy, and Chateaubriand struggled to define his place in history. Was he a monster or a genius? A liberator or a dictator? Even as his empire crumbled, the world could not stop talking about him. The cult of Napoleon only grew after his death. In 1840, nearly 2 decades after his passing, the French government under King Louis-Philippe orchestrated the dramatic return of his remains from St. Helena. The event, known as the Retour des Cendres, Return of the Ashes, was a national spectacle. His body was laid to rest beneath the Golden Dome of Les Invalides in Paris, a resting place fit for an emperor. Tens of thousands lined the streets, weeping and cheering. For many, Napoleon had become more than a man. He was the spirit of France, a symbol of greatness lost but never forgotten. Throughout the 19th century, Napoleon was reinvented to suit every political agenda. French Republicans admired his meritocratic ideals. Monarchists praised his order and authority. Nationalists across Europe took inspiration from his ability to mobilize mass armies and redefine sovereignty. He also inspired revolutionaries and liberation movements from Italy's Risorgimento to Latin American independence leaders like Simón Bolívar, who viewed Napoleon's early career as the blueprint for national emancipation. Even in countries he once conquered, such as Germany and Poland, Napoleon's reforms had a lasting impact, abolishing serfdom, reorganizing government, and spreading ideas of citizenship and nationhood. Napoleon became a paradox. The enemy of kings, yet the founder of dynasties. A revolutionary who crowned himself emperor. A man who spread the ideas of liberty through conquest. His imagery and likeness were immortalized in sculptures, oil paintings, coins, busts, and later photographs and films. His hand-in-waistcoat pose became iconic. Artists like Jacques-Louis David turned him into a Roman god. Hollywood turned him into a tragic anti-hero. He existed in a space between myth and imagery in the 20th century. Napoleon's legacy took on new dimensions. As Europe grappled with two world wars, totalitarianism, and the collapse of empires, historians and politicians re-examined his rule with fresh eyes. He was the precursor of modern authoritarianism, a man who rose from revolutionary ideals only to dismantle the democracy that enabled his ascent. His censorship, secret police, and suppression of dissent echoed in the regimes of Mussolini and Hitler. The balance between charismatic leadership and absolute control became a cautionary tale. To others, Napoleon remained a genius of governance and vision, a reformer who modernized Europe. His centralization of state power, support for science, and rational administration influenced democratic systems from France to Japan. His military genius continued to command respect. The Battle of Austerlitz, the Ulm Campaign, and even the defensive retreat from Russia became core studies in strategic brilliance. War colleges dissected his decisions, admired his adaptability, and warned against his overreach. His myth also became cultural. Novelists, playwrights, and filmmakers portrayed him in 1,000 ways. The romantic lover, the tormented exile, the cruel warmonger, the lonely dreamer. Works like Tolstoy's War and Peace, Stanley Kubrick's abandoned film project, and more recently Ridley Scott's cinematic explorations keep Napoleon alive for new generations. In psychology, the phrase Napoleon complex emerged, erroneously attributing compensatory behavior to short stature. Even though Napoleon was of average height for his time, it reflected society's tendency to reduce titanic personalities into caricatures. Yet beneath the exaggeration lies a legacy grounded in reality. Napoleon changed Europe's political map, altered the way wars were fought, and redefined leadership. His name still evokes awe and debate in France today. Napoleon remains both venerated and contested. He is taught in schools as one of the most important figures in French and world history, but his legacy sparks heated debates. Some praise his achievements, the Napoleonic Code, his role in secularizing the state, modernizing the educational system, and laying the administrative foundations of modern France. Others highlight the darker chapters, reinstating slavery in French colonies after it had been abolished during the Revolution, his treatment of political opponents, and the millions who died in his wars of conquest. In 2021, on the bicentenary of his death, France once again confronted its complicated relationship with the emperor. President Emmanuel Macron, speaking at Les Invalides, said, "To commemorate Napoleon is not to consecrate him, but to look him in the face. Around the world, his influence endures. Statues, streets, and cities bear his name. Museums and universities explore his life and times. Scholars still debate whether he was the last enlightened monarch or the first modern dictator. But perhaps most enduring is the human story of a young Corsican outsider who rose through sheer will, brilliance, and ambition to crown himself emperor of the French, and to challenge the entire European order. His was a life of triumph and tragedy, of contradictions and greatness. A man who once said, 'Imagination rules the world,' and then proceeded to shape it with his own point 2 centuries later. The shadow of Napoleon Bonaparte still stretches across the globe, not as a man on horseback, but as an idea, a legacy, a legend. Napoleon Bonaparte's life was a whirlwind of contradictions. Genius and hubris, liberation and conquest, reform and repression. To understand the man is to wrestle with history itself, a complex tapestry woven of myth and reality. Born on the island of Corsica, he rose from obscurity to command Europe's greatest armies and crown himself emperor. His ambition knew no bounds, but neither did his ability to inspire loyalty and reform governments. His reforms laid the foundations of the modern state. The Napoleonic Code influenced law worldwide. His administrative innovations shaped governance, and his educational reforms opened paths for merit over birthright. Yet his wars ravaged continents, claimed millions of lives, and redrew borders with violence. His authoritarian rule suppressed freedoms, controlled the press, and exiled opponents. The dual legacy of Napoleon is inseparable. He was both the child of the Enlightenment and a harbinger of modern dictatorship. His personal story, of a brilliant strategist, a devoted yet complicated husband, a ruthless politician, and a lonely exile, reveals the human cost behind the grand saga. Napoleon's life forces us to consider the nature of power itself. How does a single individual alter the course of history? What drives a man to seize control over millions, to impose order through force, to remake nations in his image? His story is a testament to ambition, how it can propel greatness but also blind one to limits and consequences. Despite his many flaws, Napoleon's achievements cannot be dismissed. He championed ideals of equality before the law and meritocracy long before they became widespread. He broke down feudal structures, codified laws, and professionalized armies. His vision of a united Europe, albeit under French dominance, planted seeds for later continental cooperation. Yet his failures, especially his disastrous Russian campaign and ultimate defeat, highlight the dangers of overreach. Napoleon's exile on St. Helena, isolated, watched, and powerless, serves as a poignant symbol of the fallibility of even the greatest leaders. The world's fascination with Napoleon reflects a broader human desire to understand leadership, ambition, and legacy. His life raises questions still relevant today. How should we balance power with responsibility? How do revolutions transition to stability? What lessons do history's great figures offer for modern governance? Napoleon's enduring presence in culture, from paintings and literature to film and political discourse, demonstrates the timelessness of his story. He embodies the paradox of human greatness, capable of inspiring progress and destruction, heroism and tyranny, vision and blindness. For historians, he remains a challenge, a figure too complex for simple judgment, demanding nuanced understanding. His story invites us to look beyond legends and examine the man beneath, with all his flaws and brilliance. In the end, Napoleon's life is a mirror reflecting the potentials and perils of human ambition. His meteoric rise from a provincial Corsican boy to emperor of the French is a story of talent, determination, and vision. Yet his eventual fall reminds us of the limits of power and the weight of consequences. His reforms, military innovations, and political legacy endure, shaping nations and ideas long after his death. But so too does the cautionary tale of hubris and the costs of relentless conquest. Napoleon once said, "A leader is a dealer in hope." He was precisely that, a man who ignited hope, inspired millions, and altered the course of history. 2 centuries later, his shadow still looms large, a legend, a titan,